Welcome to the Sunrise Project podcast. This podcast is a work of the Grants Past Remembrance group from sundown to sunrise. It's a truth and reconciliation project on our community's history as a sundown town. And this is an opportunity really for us to have conversations on race and conversations on how to have conversations on race, because it's not really normalized in our culture right now. And it's an opportunity to listen to our neighbors and to learn and grow together and to be in process with each other. And we talk about process a lot in our podcasts. We introduce usually mentioning process because that's so much of what is happening here. We're in process with each other while we're in process with ourselves. And we have the honor today of being here with my very dear friend, Rachel, who we have been in process together for a long time, for years. And we've been in process just in friendship, in life. Yes.
Sharing life.
But because this is important to me, conversations on race are important to me, we've been in process in that, for now it's been,
some number of years.
Some number of years.
I don't know what that number is.
Yeah. And we're in those conversations because it matters to me.
Yes.
And we're in those conversations because loving your neighbor matters to you.
Yes.
And we're in those conversations because we love to talk.
Yes, we do.
I think all those three kind of added in together. But I have to say that I am a different person because I've gotten to be in process with you. I'm a more whole person.
Likewise.
Because I've gotten to be in process with you.
Likewise.
And the work that I get to do and my understanding of how to have conversations on race is so much richer and deeper because I've been in process with you. And I'm just so thankful. And thankful that you're here today. So before we dive into the usuals, is there anything on process that you want to add?
Oh, the first thing that popped into my mind is just funny that I have been using that term a lot with my kids lately, we're in process. And so the other day somebody said, you have to stop saying we're in process, Mom. I feel like I'm in I'm a machine or something. That is not how I was thinking about it. So
do we need to
there's just one of those
clarify
examples of terms, like clarifying your terms that, can be really helpful.
Yeah.
That's not how I meant that at all. This is a good thing. And it was coming across as this, I don't know, like a mechanical thing.
Yeah.
Thought that was so interesting. And really, doesn't that kind of speak to
that really does
all of this, that we can be using a term and thinking, oh, this is such a great way to think of this. And it's so helpful to me. And to someone else, it isn't. It's not hitting them that way at all. So actually that really fits right in.
That really fits right in.
Well,
that's yes. Thank you, children.
Yes.
And that's so much, that not only speaks to the ways in which our relationship has been a blessing and a gift to each other, but it's also the nuance of this particular conversation, how easy it is to misunderstand each other, and how easy it can be to not listen long enough or be curious enough to understand what someone might be wanting to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
The process that we're talking about is an organic one that doesn't have you have to do it in this kind of way. It's so dynamic. It's going to be so different. It's not mechanical.
No. But that's how it was heard. So
that's how it was heard.
Kind of fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely fascinating. Well, let's start with this. Tell us who you are and where we might find you out and about in the community.
That's a good question. Well, I'm Rachel Boettner. I'm a wife and mother and homeschooler, and those things tend to overshadow everything else in my mind. But what I like to remind myself is that before anything else, I'm a daughter of the King. I'm a daughter of the Creator, and I would like that to undergird everything I think and do. I don't always do that, but that's the most important. That's the actual foundation. In life, you will find me at home a lot because I'm homeschooling my kids. Although as they get older, there's more there's more out there. So we're out doing various activities, and we have a homeschool co-op that we love and we've been a part of for many years. And so I'm teaching there, and that's where you'll find me, I think.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. And because this came up earlier today, you were born in Grants Pass, yes?
Yes. Yep. I've lived here all my life. And 40 years. So I'm a 40-year citizen of Grants Pass.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the question that we ask everybody, why does race matter to you?
Yes, and we've talked about this.
We have.
And I, my first response to that is, well, it doesn't matter to me. I don't think of us as divided into races. I think of humanity as one human race. We're all, each one, created by God, and we're not divided up into races. We have lots of cultural and ethnic diversity, and I think that's beautiful, and it's a reflection of our Creator. And so that's my first response is, well, I hope that I'm not evaluating people based on those things. But then on the other hand, as I thought about it deeper, I'm like, well, it matters to me in the sense that it has been such a in our culture, not just our culture, I mean, all through history and every culture, there has been such division and often on those ethnic lines. And so it matters to me in the sense that it affects the people around me in the ways that it affects the people around me, which I don't always see. So it's easier for me to think of it as like, oh, I don't think of it that way, but that's one of the things that, through your work and through the Grants Pass Remembrance work, just learning more about that there may be much more than I see, which of course there is, but what we don't see, we don't see. So it's good to have new eyes, be given new eyes, for those things. So I think that's my answer.
Yeah. There's a question that has come up lately in different conversations, and so we thought about adding it into the podcast as well. You're the first person I have asked this to, but it just goes right along with why does race matter to you? But why does Grants Pass Remembrance and the Sunrise community work matter to you?
Right. Well,
you kind of referenced it a bit.
I was kind of beginning to answer that, wasn't I? Because it's for that reason that you can live in a place your entire life, and just have, you can be having a different experience than your neighbor down the road and not know that, and then also knowing our history. I mean, GP Remembrance, it's about remembering that we have history, and we have all kinds of history, and some is not as pleasant as others, but it's good we need to know where we've come from in order to have any kind of healing and moving forward in a positive, to become a more healthy community. So I think that's very important. It's not something that I was aware of, the fact that this was a sundown town. None of that was anything I became aware of until I think I was in my 20s or so.
Yeah.
Maybe 30. And I've lived here all my life. So it's good work, even if it's uncomfortable and challenging work. Uncomfortable and challenging is often good.
Man.
Much as we might like everything to be shiny and pleasant, it's good to be reminded of all of our past, not just the fun stuff,
Yeah.
So I think it's important, and that's why.
Yeah. I don't know if I know this story, which kind of weirds me out, or maybe I'll remember it as you share it. But how did you first hear about it?
I think it was an article my sister shared on Facebook that had to do with all the laws surrounding people of color coming to Oregon and in Portland and all, you know, and I don't remember if that particular article actually mentioned Grants Pass specifically or not.
Yeah.
It may have. I remember Portland being mentioned, and it was I had no idea. It was, you know.
Yeah.
I think that was the first time I heard anything like that. Although I think I did know about the KKK marching. I feel like, and I have no idea where I heard that. I think that was something I knew about because I do remember really vaguely, because I lived here in, what was it, 95? You might remember the year better.
Yeah.
Because you've been doing the research. And when the KKK wanted to have a headquarters here or something, right? And that was not welcome. You know, and it was made clear that it wasn't welcome.
Yeah.
And I have a very vague memory of hearing about that at the time. So I would have been 12, you know. And so glad that we had that pivotal moment, you know, that turning. That's such a good thing.
It's so key.
So I have a really vague memory of that, but understanding better, like why we tend to be lacking in diversity here, you know. That's that article that my sister shared, and she had moved away at the time. But I think that was my first, like, oh wow, I had no idea that was, you know, that's why our town looks the way it does, you know, because it was all I knew.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Now we've had a number of conversations, but fairly recently, we stumbled on tangibility versus intangibility in this work, and how it can be hard to get a gauge on what the Sunrise community work is because it's in this like intangible realm.
Yes.
But before I talk about that piece, there was something else that I was sharing this conversation that we have had with my husband, and he had said, oh, there's also an intangibility with racism itself. And I was so struck by that. And I feel like I wanted to talk about that first before we talk about the intangibility with reconciliation. Because I think the nature of the intangibility is part of why it's so hard for people to understand. Now, when I say tangible and intangible, let's try to define some of these.
Yes, because like we said, terms, you know.
Terms,
what do you mean by
it's
that?
almost like concrete and not concrete. Like tangible, what it feels more tangible to be like, slavery is happening in our country, or we have a sign in our community that says, be out of town by sundown if you are Black. Or these like kind of concrete kind of pieces. So there's a way in which it can be hard for people to understand the racism as it is today, because there's this sense of like, but we aren't doing it like we used to.
Right.
Like we don't have laws about, you know, Jim Crow laws aren't active today.
Right.
We don't have a sign in our community anymore. The KKK isn't walking down our streets anymore.
Right. And they're not welcome. and it's, you know, these are good things.
So it can feel like, but we're not doing that. And so we're into this kind of this intangibility. And one of the things that was brought up in the discussion before is how it requires some leap of faith, because it's about trusting somebody else's experience. Because it's about, and it's not my experience.
Right.
Like I'm not going to be the one. It's just, I am limited in this area. So the only way I can understand what is happening today in our community in regards to racism and what that experience is today is by listening.
Right.
And by hearing someone else's story and believing them. And there's a real element there that, I feel like can feel intangible.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's hard for me.
Yeah.
I'll be honest that's a hard thing, because Because I also know that our perception, my perception and everyone's, can be flawed. Like we can perceive things not as they are. That's possible. We can project, and we can, like that's a real thing. I do it, like I know that's a possibility. And so I think it's very important to listen. And not, it's not the first thing to bring up is like, well, maybe, but it's real too. And so I don't know, like how you move through that in a way that doesn't become based solely on feelings, because our feelings are not always good indicators. No, they're good. They're indicators. They're just not
solid enough to build truth on.
Yeah.
There's got to be
they're
a
not
truth
a foundation.
that's behind.
Feelings are not a good foundation.
Yeah.
They're a useful tool.
Yeah.
But they're not a good foundation.
Yeah.
So I think that's been one of my questions, I think, is like, how do you, listening, absolutely. Listening is so important without interjecting a lot, I think is a really good practice for all of us in many arenas, But yeah, how do you do this it's a much more intangible thing than it used to be. It's not fighting slavery. That's very concrete, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think what has been intriguing for me in this conversation of intangibility is that there's almost, we're tempted to say that it's like less credible because it's more intangible. And that's been interesting for me.
Yeah.
That like, oh, well then it's different somehow.
Yeah.
And so being in conversations with people and thinking through, we have this sense of this real desire for concrete.
Yes.
And and how it can sometimes be a barrier in seeing other things that are still true, but that are more nuanced maybe in some ways, but still have that piece. I wanted to share a story that I just got to do an oral history interview with an older gentleman who had, he's in like his 70s, I think. And he'd moved here when he was 4, lived up through his senior year in Grants Pass. And he lives here again and had come back to visit various times throughout the years. And on one of these trips, I'm not going to get all of this right, but he talked about a situation where he'd heard where a friend of his had experienced being pulled over by the cops in town, and had an experience that was threatening, that was not, he did not feel safe about. Yeah. And I've gotten, it's taken me so long, I've gotten a little bit better at asking more questions about like, what did that feel like? What did that sound like? What did the cops do that you knew of? And part of this is him sharing. He then started sharing a personal experience because in his younger years, he was more of a hippie. And so in our community at that time, that was another group of people that was ostracized and treated in a very particular manner. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is, so he had a similar kind of experience that he started sharing about in trying to communicate the nonverbal nature of racism. Yeah. And how it's not always,
and what a tricky thing,
verbal, right? It's it's another intangible. Yeah. This nonverbal is an intangible thing, but it feels so heavy. And so then he started to share his own personal experience and how, and those elements of how you, like how somebody cannot say anything, but you can know if like this is a safe situation for you or not. Yeah. Or you can know, like there's this other kind of knowing that is very real, and I was just so intrigued by that. It's in that same world of intangibility that is just as real and true, but harder to like define it, or somehow we're not as
Yeah.
satisfied
Yeah.
with it
Yeah.
as the like, just tell me what they said. You know, like,
Right.
well,
Right.
guess what?
That's
they
tricky.
managed to not say anything.
Yeah, I that's come up with my kids every so often lately. You know,
Yes.
just in like the way they respond to me telling them to do something, or you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And having a moment of like, well, the words you said were not the problem. It was how you responded to me that felt disrespectful.
Yes.
And that is usually met with, you know, like, what?
Yeah,
You know, like
what are you saying?
I said I'd do it, you know, and like, yes. But the way in which you said it was, you know, there was not a willingness in your response. And it's a tricky thing, you know, to, I don't know. It's been something I've been working through with, like, how do I get that across to them without it being I can't say anything right, you know, like that's frustrating too.
Yeah.
Because you really can have times where you did not intend what somebody else took.
Yes.
That can happen too.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's really sticky stuff. I don't know, you know, I mean, you just have to take it one situation at a time. There aren't like hard and fast rules about it.
Yeah.
And I kind of like rules.
I know, right? I don't think you're the only one.
No, I don't think
we
so.
like being
I
able
think
to
a lot
check
of
a
us
box and
do,
say,
yes.
this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think that parallel with your kids is a really good one to remember, because it creates an empathy for, I don't know if I'm the only one seeing this parallel between conversations on race, as well as, you know, these nuances of, is this person being openly hostile?
Right.
Is there, and are they even aware that they're being openly hostile?
And like they actually might not be.
They
I think
might
that's
not
possible.
actually be
So in the same
aware.
way that we listen to those who feel like I'm being attacked in some way, to also be willing to listen to those who appear to be doing the attacking. Like, what is your intent here? And I mean, it could be, I think it often is, you know, with my kids, you know, my example of that, you know, like, there is not a willingness, and I was reading that right, you know.
Yes, totally.
That may be a thing.
Yeah.
And that totally may be the case, you know, in many times. But I don't know, it's something I'm working through. How do I get that across to them without doing my own kind of attack on them, so that they can't hear me anymore, you know, like it's both. It's, and I haven't like cracked the code or anything yet. But I feel like it's important.
It's making me think of a number of other oral histories that we've gathered, people talking about people of color that live in Grants Pass, that talk about not feeling safe in different spaces, and not feeling like this is their home, because of, I think those are tied in there. And that sense of, I think one of them shared that her biggest fear is being in a space and having somebody act out their hostility against her, and everybody else assuming it was her fault. And that's where history comes into play. These ways in which, and she's like, there's this piece of like, it shouldn't just rest on one person. Like it shouldn't just rest on our neighbors of color. Like it should rest on all of us. The burden of this history and the burden of the intangibility of racism, whether that person that's acting out, that may or may not act out with hostility, whether they're aware of those nuances within themselves, it's still a burden that we should all be carrying.
And that's where the work that you're doing is helpful, is bringing that awareness, is having it, because, you know, it's, you can really just not know, or, you know, not see it. Sometimes we need other eyes. We need to see things with other eyes, because we just have ours, you know, and we need to see what it sees like, what it looks like, you know, from someone else's perspective. even while even if that perspective is flawed, like so is mine, you know, like everyone has a lens that they're seeing, and it's not, I don't think any of us probably is seeing all of reality at any time.
We need
really.
each other.
So we need each other.
We need each
exactly.
other.
So we need each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, I think it's an important piece to acknowledge that for ourselves and for those around, you know, that none of us has the full picture all the time, you know, and that's that's humility, you know, it has to do with humility, like having the humility to recognize that, like, just because I see the world like this doesn't mean it's all there is, you know, there may be more. I'm sure there's more.
There's definitely more.
There might be more than what I see in my little window.
Yeah.
You know?
I want to take a moment to share about how you and Josh, my husband, have played some pretty key roles in this process of being passionate about this work and passionate about this in seeing healing happen in this way in our community. Because you each will bring up things that I don't want to hear.
You're welcome.
And I'm so thankful. Like it's been one of those things for me that it's very easy when you're passionate about something that I don't know what word to use here, but it's something about that you know is good and right and true. Like it has some kind of moral something in there.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's some other words, some ethical, there's something in there.
Yes.
When it's something like that, it can be really tempting to be prideful in that and to think that is the lens. Yeah. Because this is good and right, because it is true. I am seeing a true thing. Right. But there are so many other ways in which I do not have the whole picture on this true thing that it can be easy for me to think that, like, oh, I can just go with people that see this thing. Yeah. And do this. Yeah. And if someone is going to say it is ways. It's more comfortable. but there's so much depth and richness that has come getting to be with people that see it differently, that aren't like originally passionate about this, and so can say, wait a minute, I don't know about that, or what about, but when you say this, what are you talking about, you know, like, or like, I think that, like, it's just been so meaningful to have that, and it can be easy to push that aside. Anyway, that whole lens piece, I think I just wanted to, like, breathe the word into that, the way in which we need each other and we need to see from other perspectives, even the ones that we originally go, no, not that. Because it's not just about believing believing the people that are telling us the stories of this is what racism looks like today. Right. Like, there is a believing and a trusting that we need to do in order to heal from what is racism today. Yeah. And there's a believing and a trusting of those that are saying, but wait, I've got questions that needs to happen. Because if we don't believe and trust that they're not just saying those things just to be a pill, right? Or to, as I call or to brush it off, or to brush it off, or taking it lightly, like, or not, that no, this isn't it. Like, but to say, talk about that more. Like, what? To have a believing and a trusting. And you've done that for me, instead of, when I had questions or, like, well, what about this? And and what do you mean by that? And, that you were willing to listen and to take my questions seriously, that, like, that's a real question, and it's not just a wanting to push it away. It's like, no, I really have a question, and so I love that. I love that we've been able to do that for each other, while the nation is raging about these same things, to be able to, and that's like I've shared with you, I have a hard time, just
the way I'm wired, I guess. Like, it's hard for me to think on a community or certainly nationwide scale. Like, I don't think that way very much. But relationship, like one-on-one or small groups or, like that's where I think, I don't know. I always feel like it's in those small spaces that the ultimate community-wide, nationwide healing will come from. And I love that you can think broader than that, though, that there are things to do that you can do on a community-wide scale. But I don't think that way about anything. I'm very, very relational, like one-on-one, tell me your story on a one-on, and that's a totally different thing than like what's happening all across the nation, because it's too broad. Like, I don't know. How can we make any judgment about any of it, when it's so removed? It's hard for me to do that. It's just my lens. It's a little narrow.
It's valuable. We just need each other.
But I was going to say, just like in talking about that perspective, the lens that we each have, and that it is limited. None of us has the whole picture ever. But that doesn't mean that what we're seeing in our perspective is not a piece of the truth.
Yes.
Like it may be. Yeah. It may be really true what we're seeing. Yeah. Even though it's not the whole story, and it doesn't invalidate what someone else sees that looks opposite. I think there can be somehow, I think God is this big, that truth can be so much bigger than we think, that it's not as narrow. And if we say yes to this, it doesn't mean we have to say no to that. There's like both. Yeah. Which blows my mind. I can't comprehend that, but I have faith that I don't know if that's even belief. That's just faith.
Just faith. I can't see it.
I have faith that it's so much bigger than I think. But it doesn't mean that the little piece that I get to see is not true. I can see a little piece of the truth, and we all can. And I want to hear from other people. And what are you seeing? Yeah. Because that's a piece of it also. Yeah. Yeah. So,
I think that's very much what happens. I remember when we first stumbled on the conversation about race and that term race and why we use the term race. Yeah. And you shared a bit about what you shared earlier. And that was in kind of the earlier seasons of our discussions. Yeah. And so I was in a season where I was like internally, I went, no, because I was so needing, because I was afraid that you saying that we're all one human race was not seeing the harm that has been done, and that we've made this term and it's seeped in history, and we've lived it out. Our minds are So, but because I was so in that, I was like, we can't hear. It is such a grace to me that like our friendship is this cushion of, I know Rachel. Like, I know Rachel is loving and kind. I know Rachel is thoughtful. I know. And so but even with that one, like, it was harder to slow down internally. And I don't remember if you remember I think
you were very gracious about it.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
I probably didn't.
It's so much because of you, because we have this gift of friendship.
And that's why I love, that's why I feel like relationship is so important. It's much harder to have these conversations, have any kind of hard conversation if there isn't relationship first. Yeah. It doesn't mean we can't learn from someone, and I would like to cultivate that in myself, being more willing to listen, even if I don't have a relationship with someone, I want to cultivate that. Yeah. But typically as human beings, we do better if we have that reference point of like, well, I know this person, and maybe they're sounding blind about this, but I know that's not all they are. And maybe that's part of it, is that we can reduce people to whatever their view is. And nobody's that simple.
Yeah.
I don't think.
No, we're so
I think
dynamic.
there's always more to it.
So there's always more to
than
it
that. Even if it's a true blind spot, because people have true blind spots.
Yeah.
That absolutely happens.
To be mature in so many areas, and then to have an area of like, oh, this hasn't gotten an opportunity to mature with the rest of it.
Yes.
That happens. That's all of us.
Absolutely.
Always.
Yeah.
Like that's a never ending one.
Yeah.
Now on the community level that I end up seeing is I have this trust that now in my own life, because we've had this friendship, this relationship in which we can explore these conversations. Now, oddly enough, with Josh, I'm not as patient with him. I'm more reactionary. How does that happen?
Yes.
So with my husband, I actually employ more of natural self-control with you than I do with my husband.
Yes.
And with you than I do with somebody that I don't know at all. But because of this space, I have gotten better at both of those other spaces. And so my hope communally is that as we hear these kinds of things are possible, that whether or not and I believe this is true, when we share stories, like we don't have to learn it or experience it ourselves.
Yes.
We can say, oh, okay, I can take that learning and like build on that.
Yeah. That's the power of story in general, whether it's fiction or not. Like fiction can do that. It doesn't even have to be literally true, for us to learn from it. And I think we're kind of wired to learn from story, so we can't help it.
We can't help it.
So
what a good
stories.
gift.
Yes, it's a wonderful gift. God is a storyteller, I think, like this is his story. And it's so complicated and there's so many layers and I don't understand it.
So many moments of both.
Yes.
Where yes. Can we really do both and?
Right.
Or that holding tension of like,
yeah.
Really?
I know my husband has talked about that in Hebrew thought, I believe, there's like much more of a sense of the both and, that it's like, and he could speak to that better, what he remembers learning about, but just that it's okay to say yes and yes, even to things that look almost opposite, that it's bigger than we think, and I love that. Yeah. Even though I can't comprehend it. But it's good. I think it's good.
It is good. Yes. Well, let's shift over, though I feel like we've kind of, this is how we talk. So welcome to our conversation. We like ebb and flow and weave, but we've kind of been in the intangibility of racism a bit. Let's shift over to the intangibility of the reconciliation work. So it's not a terribly uncommon experience for me as I share for people to have a hard time in understanding what is it that you're doing. Now, yes. I've most potently experienced it with you because we dive into these but it's taken me a while to realize, that's just the nature of this work. It's not that I'm having a hard time describing it or still trying to figure out how to describe it. It's that this work in itself has a real element of intangibility. We're not doing check this box, check this box, check this box, and then we're done.
And then we'll be done. I think maybe would you say that there's really no such thing as do you see an end, like a goal in sight of like, and now we've, and that is an interesting question. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Because because I think on a more personal, a small, I tend to think on a relational level. Yeah. When I think of like, if there's a breach between someone close to me, and myself, I think there is a point at which you would say, we're reconciled. I forgive you. And it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean that there might not be lasting consequences of some kind, but you are forgiven. And we're not going to go back to that. We're not going to keep mentioning it. We're going to say, it's healed. You are forgiven. So do you see that happening on a community or nationwide level? And if so, how? I don't know what that looks like. How would you ever? I know how it could look on a personal level, because I think that's so important on a personal level, to not hold grudges, to be able to say, I forgive you, you're released. You don't have to keep beating yourself up about it. But on a large scale, like, I don't know how you do that, because not every individual on both sides of the hurt is going to be in either of those places of saying, yes, I see what was wrong. I am so sorry. Will you forgive me? And you can't. What does that look like? Yeah. I'm sure you have thoughts.
I have ideas.
You have thoughts.
I'd love to share them.
Yes.
And both and is a wonderful place to start.
Yes.
So I think there's a both and at play. Now, when you first said that, the question that you asked was something like, do you see an end or something?
Yeah.
Now, what I see an end to is to our story as a sundown town. I see that the process that we're walking, there will be a moment where I could tell somebody that's coming into town that asks me some question about, hey, is it safe for me to be in Grants Pass? Now, someday I look forward to saying, actually, Grants Pass walked through a process of listening to the stories of their neighbors, of collecting oral history. We have a history. There's a legit reason for you to ask that question. And there are things that they have done that lets us know that their desire is to grow in this kind of way. So their desire is to be a sunrise community, to not be a sundown town anymore.
Yes.
And so getting to point to the end of that story.
Yeah.
So as of right now, because when that sign, our sign came down whenever we stopped practicing driving people out of town.
Right.
Now, if there was a story there, like, we haven't heard any stories yet of
how that
stopped.
That would be fascinating too. I would love to know that story.
We heard that it came, like, we've started to collect stories of when it came down, when the sign came down.
Okay.
But there's no, like, the people that have heard about that remember when it was in the news, when the sign came down.
Yeah.
They don't have any memory connected to why.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did that
So if there could have been a moment then, there could have been a moment of, this is not who we want to be. We want to be this instead.
Yeah.
But I think what probably happened was our story is that it came down in the late 70s, early 80s, is that there was like we shouldn't have this sign up anymore. And I would guess that there were a lot of people that like, we don't want that sign up anymore.
But it was like
but it wasn't like it. So it disappeared.
Yeah.
Now, but all that hurt still happened. There wasn't an opportunity to be, there's nothing else. So this is still a wound. So I look forward to someday being able to tell somebody, hey, check it out. There's now a new sign in town that talks about that history of that sign and that history of the practice that for decades, century was a part of this community, and it's not a part of this community anymore, and that's not who they want to be known as anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm not just saying it as me as an individual,
right? But
being able to point to, that was true, and it's not anymore.
Yeah.
So there is an end to that story,
and having this is my. My curiosity has always been like, how do you speak for a community? Because you can't guarantee that there aren't going to be, there are going to be individuals within any community.
There will always be individuals
there
in
will
any
be
community.
residual, whatever.
Totally.
You can't guarantee that. So that's an interesting thing to me. Like, how do you have a sense of, as a community? I mean, there was the time in the 90s when we apparently said as a community
that would be a part of.
We don't want
that would be a part
to be
of
known
the
by this,
we don't want the KKK to make this their home.
We don't want that to be. That's not who we want to be anymore.
Moments like that and experiences of talking to people. I have never run into anybody yet that has said, well, I still want us to be a sundown town. Like I've not run into that yet.
Yeah.
Now, does it mean that when we welcome people into our community, like, is that always comfortable? That's not always comfortable.
No.
But we know that discomfort is a beautiful thing, that there's deep good that can happen.
Yeah.
So becoming a welcoming community is something that I have not yet found somebody that has said they don't want to be a welcoming community. Are there people that want that? Yeah, there are going to be people that don't want to be us to be a welcoming community. And the tricky part is those are still the people that have the loudest voices.
That can certainly.
Because there's been nothing else said. It's an empty slate.
Yeah.
And so no, so we stopped saying no with a sign. And we stopped saying no by driving people out of town after they came to perform in our community and then saying you can't, Right. So we stopped saying no in that way.
So,
But there are still people that do say no in our community. And when people of color hear those no's, they assume that it's the rest of the community.
Right. Yeah.
And there's not any reason for them to assume that it's just a minority group. Because we've never had a moment of saying, hey, that's not us. That's not the majority of us.
Right.
That's not what we want.
Yeah.
And so there is an intangibility as well to the well, how do you say this for your community?
Right. But
that piece of, and it's slow and it's there's points along the way, but there is that kind of thing that as time moves on and you look back and you can say, no, these things happened. I can still say, if someone asks me right now, I can still point to the work that we're doing today and say, well, this has been my experience so far. But I look forward to looking back on it in a little bit more of a concrete thing. So there is a concreteness about the end of the sundown town story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we are now in this season. Now here's the both and. So I know that was already kind of this is hard for me to grasp, but the both and is that this is and I'll quote Taylor Stewart on this one. He talks about, when you want to be a good person, you never reach a point where you're like, I've done it.
And now I am.
I'm a good person. I can stop being a good person now. Right. Because I've reached it and it's done.
Right.
That's not
the human experience.
That's not the human experience. And that's not the human experience for anything. I never get to say, I've now been a good wife. I'm done.
Right.
In that relationship where you reconciled with your friend.
Right.
I mean, you could each decide, well, we've reconciled, but we aren't really going to be active friends.
Yeah,
you could decide that.
Right, that can happen.
But if you split ways and never talk, you know what I mean? There's a well, now you care for your friendship. Now there's a cultivating and a caring for that friendship. That's now you're just doing
ongoing.
This. It's ongoing. Yeah. This is just part of life.
Relationship.
This is the how of life.
Yeah.
And this is the how of all of we all have that. We all have relationships that we care for that matter to us, that are important for whatever reason. And so there's always some way. In different seasons, it's more attentive. In other seasons, it's not.
Right. Yeah.
But it's always present.
Yes.
So in that way, Sunrise community work will always be present because it's relationship with our neighbors.
Right.
It's a caring for our community that we love.
Yeah.
And it's growing in a certain kind of way. We want to grow in being welcoming. We want to grow in that all of our neighbors would feel safe and respected and at home. That's the kind of community we want to be.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it doesn't end, but it's not something we need to be afraid about because we've done this before.
That's just, that's how.
It's just a part of life.
How life is, yes.
But it's intangible.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not a checkbox.
No. But what you're saying is that there can be, because people in general tend to be concrete, need something tangible, it can be helpful to have something to point to, to say that we have a large number of us have agreed,
Yes.
that this is what, these are the goals that we're striving for. This is the kind of community that we want this to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it will be perfectly that all the time.
No.
It means this is the ideal. This is what we're...
Yeah, this is the
this
direction
is
we're
where
going
Yeah,
in.
this is the direction that we want to go.
This is the direction.
Yeah.
That's it. And right
that can
now,
be a really helpful thing.
that can be a really helpful thing, not just for people that are in our community, that like to be able to say, I'm so sorry you had that experience. And to be able to have a reason to remind them you're not like I can't do that right now.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
like we can't do that yet. In all honesty. And but we're getting there. Like there's movement in that. There was something else you were just saying that I totally like blanked on, but
we can't say you're not alone yet.
we can.
I think,
here's
like you're saying, you haven't come across anybody yet who has said, "Oh yeah, I don't want this to be a welcoming town." You know what I mean?
That's true.
So I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like,
Oh,
'cause I
see,
think
you're good for me.
Yeah, see, I'm always,
Can
always
I?
pushing a little.
It's hard right now for me.
I understand
still.
having something tangible being helpful because it's a something to point to.
Yeah.
But maybe the tangible thing is like it's an acknowledgement of what already is.
What already is.
Like
I think
what we're saying
that's
is
a
that there's
really good
actually a
point.
large body of people,
Yeah.
who their heart, they might not do it perfectly, but and they have blind spots, just like we're saying,
Yeah.
but there is a desire
Yeah.
for it to be a welcoming community.
Yeah.
There are what does that look like? There are lots of ways we
growing.
can think about that
It's
too.
dynamic.
So yeah, it's going
Yeah.
to be dynamic.
I think.
And it doesn't, I
Yeah.
always feel like pushing back against the word safe because I feel like life is not safe.
I just had a conversation with someone about that.
It's not safe. It's,
I think
like
safe
anytime you
meaning-
walk out the door, I know there are different kinds of safe, and I know what you're talking about. I do. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But I feel the like
There's
how can
a
we
tension
guarantee
in that
safe?
word.
Like we can't
Totally.
guarantee safe
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I don't know when I'm going to slip up, let alone the other members of my community. You know.
I think
don't
that word actually might be an interesting one to hear, like from our neighbors in our community.
Yeah.
The way white neighbors would define the word safe versus the way people of color in our community would define the word
yes.
safe. That might be interesting.
Yep.
Because
There are
safe
those
is a
terms
big
again,
thing in our
you know.
community, and it's one that there's a lot of passion around for white neighbors.
Yes, I
as
push
well.
back against that too. Just saying.
Which one?
that against the way white neighbors think of safe. Like we've got to keep ourselves safe and
Yes, that
protect
you would
our
push-
protect our homes and
that
protect
you
our
would push
property.
against that, yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
understand that obviously we want
Yeah.
to keep our but on the other hand, life is not safe. I don't think as a Christian, I don't think what I'm called to is a life of safety. That's not what I'm called to. I'm called to follow the Lord wherever he leads. And that might be uncomfortable and dangerous sometimes. And I don't like that actually. But I just think the goal is not safe as a Christian. That's a different thing.
That's a different kind of
than
safety as well.
Community.
Walking into a space
don't
that
know.
someone calls you into that's not safe is there's a different layer and
Yes.
dynamic that's at play there.
Yes, absolutely.
As opposed to I am just walking, I'm
You have
just
no
getting
choice
groceries
to-
right
yes,
now.
yes.
And I feel unsafe because the
Yes.
way in which I am being followed or watched, and I don't know if these followings or these watchings are going to go further into like, are they going to act out against me, or are they going to call the cops on me because they assume something of me that is not true? Like, I feel like the layers of safe, I only can tap into because I've heard enough stories now of, oh, that's your experience.
Yeah.
Like this is like you avoid certain stores in our community because of the way in which you're followed in those stores, and you don't know at which point they're, like that's, there's a there's a safe that it's nuanced.
Yes.
And so it's a different kind of safe, but I can hear how we only have one word for it.
Yeah.
And so there can
be a better one.
It can be tricky. This like baseline of safe. There's we want people to feel a baseline of safe. We want you to be able to walk down the street. We want you to be able to feel like you can, go to the park and enjoy yourself or go grocery shopping and not feel afraid. Like,
right.
That's what we would like, a community that is.
Yes.
And how do we love everybody?
Yeah.
And do that,
and
as opposed to like saying, don't be here so that we can be safe. That is how we have traditionally done safe.
Yes.
Is by saying, don't be here and then we're safe.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's an interesting, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about. Yeah. And I do think, to go back to your question earlier, I might not be in the best spot because I've been in it in depth. I won't be in the best spot and this is why I'm not alone. So I'm not alone in this work, which is worth mentioning again and again and again. Right. To say when we've done it, because I see a lot of the nuances of, there might not be people that have said, well, I want to be unwelcoming, but I've definitely had people that have said, why are you doing this work? And we don't need that to happen.
Yeah.
While I can see that they're experiencing a wound, like there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And so we still have healing to do. And so we have podcasts like this where we talk about race and where we still have questions at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where we're still like, well, what does this both and look like?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think we get to tie it up in a neat bow.
Yeah.
But, I like neat bows.
Neat bows are fun.
But I don't.
Neat bows are fun.
Yeah, it's not that kind of thing.
They're a falseness sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes we opt for falseness.
Yeah.
Because it's
more comfortable.
It's more comfortable. But it doesn't serve us in the future.
No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't leave room for growth.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other little piece I wanted to mention was that concrete in this picture of both and, where this ongoing work and this like concrete, there's an element of concrete in this work. The other gift that it does, like having a historical marker about our history, the other gift that gives is that it gives future generations something to build on. When we don't talk about this history, which is where we're currly at, like we're starting to talk about it.
Right. I would say there's more.
But it's hard. There's definitely more. There's definitely more.
Yes.
Much more. That's, you do help me see that perspective. Right. There's definitely more.
There's more.
We also lost the history of the 95 rally. That also didn't get talked about.
Yeah.
And so we didn't get to have our children build on that which had already been done because we didn't talk about any of it.
Or not in a, because like it's there.
Oh,
and
it's there.
In an intangible way, I think it has been built on in some sense.
In some ways.
Things have changed. There is different, it is different than it was. There's a general feeling, I think. But maybe without there isn't much clear history of that though.
I think
pretty,
and if
is it as vague as my memories are very vague.
I mean, we have our newspaper articles. Like it's a clear history. It's a definite clear history.
Okay.
What I mean is that it's been lost to people's memories because we don't talk about any of this history. And so we lose the beautiful with the broken when we don't talk about this history. Yeah. And so we haven't been able to really use that to grow and to take significant steps forward, I don't feel like.
Yeah.
And in connecting with people of color that were there at the 95 rally, they would say that they thought that things would happen after that.
Okay.
And they didn't. And there's growth that hasn't happened that they were hoping for.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because we we missed out on really talking about the other broken bits too. Like you can't ever just talk about one piece of something. We need that whole history.
Yeah.
And so the hope is that in talking about all of it, not only can we build on those strongholds, those good foundations, but we can really actually grow and heal because we're doing it as a whole.
Right.
And so in having something like that, so the kind of the concrete pieces of doing this work, of ending our story as a sundown town, of saying, no, we're a sunrise community now. Part of that is also giving us a foothold for future generations to know which path, this is the direction we're walking.
Yeah.
Like it's been kind of we've atrophied, there's not like we aren't really walking in any intentional direction. And which means then you do what you've done before.
Right.
Just you call it different things.
Yeah.
So yeah. I love talking with you.
I'm so glad. It's same here. Like talking with you.
Are there any other thoughts that come to mind or pieces that we've stumbled over that you want to bring back up to the forefront as we think of?
I don't know. I think it's there isn't an end. You know what I mean? Like it's not a, I mean, we have to end, but there's not we have to end this, but there's not it's not, and now we're done, kind of thing. That's what we're saying is
this continues.
This isn't on, and that's good.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a bad thing, to continually be, aware that there's growth, that we get to keep growing in all kinds of ways, and especially when it comes to this conversation. So I think that's all.
Yes. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you, Gabby.
You're welcome.
Very good.